Hello. Thanks for joining me today on the show, where, whether you're a teacher or a student, you can get inspiration and become better. Today, I have a very good friend of mine, Susan Hoover, in the very first show. So, take a listen, be inspired, and enjoy. Okay, I'd like to welcome Susan Hoover to the first show of my podcast, and I'd like to say hi.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm good.
Okay, right now, as of this recording, it is January 1st, 2016. Thank you for helping me. And I spent the whole day with Susan and her lovely husband, Kevin, and we'll hear more about him in a second. And basically, I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, where are you from, like specifically, and tell us one special thing about the city that you're in.
Okay, I actually came from Northern Ontario, Canada. I came from a little island called St. Joseph's Island. And tell you a little bit about that place. It's up north in Canada, which means it can get very cold. But most importantly, it's a beautiful place. It's a small population, only grows in the summer when the tourists come. And we're usually most known for our corn on the cob being delicious and our famous maple syrup.
I thought only Quebec was known for maple syrup, but okay. Is there anything else that the island is known for? Because you mentioned it's pretty remote, and you mentioned something about maybe having to go off the island for school. And tell us more about the geography of where that is for some people who might not know the geography of Canada.
Okay, when you look at Canada, if you look at central part of Canada, there's three lakes known as there's 5 lakes known as the 5 Great Lakes, but there's 3 of them that look attached. They come together, and basically my island is right in the center of where they join Lake Superior and Lake Huron, in something called the North Channel. There's a few islands there. That's where I grew up. We could go to school, but once we reached high school, secondary school, we actually had to go off of the island, where we took a school bus every day to go off, and then the high school would be in one place for all the 5 surrounding areas to join together.
Okay, now my question to you is, and you mentioned this to me before, what is the population of the island that you're from?
The total population of the island is about 1,500. However, my area of the island, which is a village, only has 200 people.
Wow. So basically you know everyone.
You know every single one of your neighbors.
Okay, that's, I grew up in Montreal. That's 2.5 million people, or maybe 3 million, depending if you count the surrounding islands. So we've come from different places, and that's like a stark contrast. Now, where I grew up, we spoke French. Like, did you have to speak any other languages besides English?
No, actually, predominantly there we just speak English. There's no French at all. However, we can learn French as a secondary language in school.
Okay. Now, in the intro, I mentioned how we met, but give me your version. Let's let the listeners know how we met. Now, remember, this is aimed towards teachers and students. Teachers because maybe they've been thinking of going overseas of teaching, or maybe they're in the country that they want to be already, and they're looking for ideas and inspiration. Or maybe you're a student listening to this podcast right now, and you're looking to know what makes a great student, and why should you pay attention to this podcast, because I know I have the guests who are teachers here have experiences. They're in certain niches, so they bring their own expertise and experience. So tell the audience how we met.
Well, actually, we met as students, I guess, in the same school, although you were a class above me, in the same place, in the same school at the same time. However, I guess that was more as acquaintances, not so much as friends. So, of course, getting to know each other better as we were on a same team overseas, working together in Indonesia.
All right. And tell us about how you met your husband. I know that you got married recently.
Yes, very recently, just a few months ago, still in the newlyweds, I guess. Met my husband actually overseas as well, in another country, in Cambodia.
What were you teaching, and what kind of school were we at? I want to hear it from your own words, because maybe people might ask, okay, what kind of school did you go to? What's your take on that, or what do you have to say about that?
Okay, I mean, when we met as students together, it was in a Bible Institute, which I've also opened another Bible Institute in Indonesia. However, at the time when I met my husband, we were actually teaching in a reunion of a school in Cambodia, which was actually an institute of church planters.
All right, so here's the $1 million question. How did you, or why did you get into teaching? teaching?
I guess it happened as a process, actually. All my family is teachers. Almost all of my siblings are teachers. My parents were previously teachers as well.
Okay.
However, I never saw myself as a teacher. I didn't think that I even had the gift of teaching and wasn't really interested ever in being a teacher. However, after doing all my work in Indonesia, I saw a need to train up the local people. And so if I wanted other people to join in on the work that I was doing and get involved, I saw that there was a need to teach them to do so. So I actually became a teacher not out of the desire to teach, but more out of it being the way, the way to be able to get to what I wanted to do. And after I started doing it, then I realized that it was actually enjoyable to do. It was different than what I had pictured it being before. So now I actually spend a lot of my time teaching.
Okay, and just to be clear towards the listeners, this is a mission school. When I met you and when we went to Indonesia, we were missionaries in a city near Medan called Brastagi. And actually, Susan was one of the inspirations that had me start teaching. I can tell you guys myself, but she knows the story. She was there, so I'll let her take it away. We visited one of the slum areas in the city of Brastagi, and if you want to share about that, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, Critic started teaching before I did. We were doing some different work, obviously many different things we did as missionaries, and he found one of the poor areas and decided one of the best ways to help them. He did many different things, bringing the food, having relationships with them, sharing with them, praying for them. But he also started doing English classes, and also in another area. I think if I'm not wrong, there was 3 different areas that ended up having English lessons at some point, or 2 different areas.
Two that I know of, maybe
Okay.
3.
So I guess I wasn't always a part of them, but I would come in, I guess intermittently sometimes, and see things going on. And it also gave me some ideas. Later on, I also did it sometimes as well, going into schools or opening English sessions for those who wanted to learn. However, because of my traveling schedule being more frequent after that, I guess I had to stop that, and then when I finally opened a school is when I got more involved into teaching.
All right, cool. Okay, just want to hit back the point when I asked you how did you get into teaching. Now, what kept you teaching? I mean, like you mentioned that it came out of a need, and what would you say to like new teachers who might be wondering, should I go overseas and teach, or what would you say to teachers who are teaching right now?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, is that teaching, I actually found myself enjoying teaching. And I guess one of the biggest enjoyments of teaching is the rewards. And the rewards you get is seeing people learn, right? And
Yes.
seeing what you can actually pass on to others. And so I think that's what has kept myself into teaching now. It was something different than what I thought before. Maybe I grew up thinking teachers are a certain way, they do this. Maybe I thought it was even a boring job, and that kind of thing. But as I said, I started even just because there was a need. I wanted people to be trained. And so I decided that I needed to train them. And then, of course, going through the years of seeing them being trained up, of seeing lives being changed, seeing people learn new things, be able to step into new areas of their life, get a higher education and these things, then it's the reward that you get of seeing these things take place. It actually makes it enjoyable. It's very fulfilling.
Yeah, there is definitely a reward in teaching, a sense of fulfillment, seeing like your kids growing up. Now, I hate to say on the flip side, like there are some people that you see and you get to meet and you get to know, and they should not be teachers. And I guess that's a topic for another lesson. But what I guess Susan is trying to say is that you gotta want to, you got to be willing. It shouldn't be a job, because you're dealing with kids' lives and their livelihood and their futures. And I guess you need to be passionate about that. What would you have to think, or what would you say about that?
I would say it as well, that if you don't care about the people you're trying to teach, then you won't put much into it. You know, anyone can just give lessons to someone. Anyone can just tell someone what pages to read in a book, and give assignments and give marks out. But it's very different when you actually desire to see someone learn or gain a specific skill or be able to do something different.
My next question I want to ask you is, what's the biggest lesson or lessons that you've learned personally being a teacher?
I guess is that it's in anything in life, the more you learn, the more you realize you have to learn. So let's come across this as well. As I was reading a book on teaching, give some different steps. But the main point that I got out of it is that it's very easy to just teach theories. It's just very easy to teach just as general lessons.
Yes.
But it said lazy teachers won't give illustrations, examples, make things interesting. And so I realized that although sometimes we want someone to learn something, maybe we go back to the way that someone taught us, and so we just go back to the fact that we know the information we want to pass along, and so we just give it to them straight as it is. But that doesn't help most people learn. And so, I found that as a teacher, it takes time, it takes effort to learn and think about what would make something interesting, what would make things easier for someone to pick it up, and that kind of thing. So I find that as a teacher, I've had to learn a lot.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest complaints that we've had teaching in Taiwan and I guess in overseas Asia, where teachers teach grammar, but to use it in real life, they don't know how, the students don't know how to use it, and that's probably the biggest issue is finding opportunity and knowing how to use the vocabulary that they actually learned. And then going back to what you said, making things practical and interesting. I've had high school teachers who taught English, and I'm sorry to say, they were boring, and I would have friends who would agree with that. So, okay, that's thank you for your response for that. And let me ask you the next thing. Out of all your years teaching, I've taught almost 10 years, not full time, but I've started almost 10 years ago. How long have you been teaching?
That's interesting. I mean, yes, as a speaker, so when it's preaching, which is a little bit different than teaching in a way, I've been doing it for 12 years.
12 years.
However, teaching in a school, more like setting or classroom setting, I guess would be about 7 or 8.
Okay, I have my next question lined up, but I'm going off script because you have a very interesting story, because you were about 18 or 19 when you first went to Indonesia. I'll let you tell it yourself, but you were female. And tell us how those first few months and years were, because you had other team members who had maybe opportunity because they were married or men. And tell us how you felt during that time, and tell us how you got through that situation.
I was actually 20, yeah, which is still quite young.
Okay.
I guess 20 when I went to Indonesia for the first time, and yeah, it was definitely a very life-changing experience. You prepare yourself a lot with different things. I mean, culture shock and all these things, but maybe you don't realize all that you really go through going into a new country where you don't know the language. So many things to learn, and obviously coming so young into an Asian culture, being a female, I guess people looked at me and didn't think that I had much to offer in the beginning. So they would usually prefer to hear from someone who was older or, who they thought had more experience, which wasn't necessarily true. But I guess what got me through was just, I had to ask myself sometimes why I was there. And so if it was just about doing a certain job of getting numbers or seeing how many people, would listen to me, was that why I was there? Or was it because, what was the real purpose? And so when I got right down to the root of it, I guess I just decided that I had to find a way to make it work. So, I went out and just started meeting people one by one on the street and talking to them, meeting different people. And I guess just the most important thing is just you don't give up. You just keep finding a way. And I found that through the years is that determination will take you a long way. Past the people who have sometimes charisma or past the people who have sometimes a gift or age or anything experience above you. But I just found that through the years as I just kept going, a lot of others gave up. Went back home, and left and stopped doing things. And I'm the one after 12 years who's still around.
Yeah. I won't let Susan toot her own horn, but I'll do it for her. Like, after 2 years, she can speak as good as a local. And the example I give is, if she's talking on the phone, the other person on the other end will not know whether that person is Indonesian or not. So, and like she said, she's been there for so long. She's seen many missionaries and people come and go, but she's been there for 12 years. And I guess this leads up to, the main part of, why this podcast exists, is to help teachers and students. Right now, students, I'm speaking specifically to you. I'm going to let Susan tell you how she started learning Indonesian. And she said she had divine intervention, and I'll let her say it in her own words.
When I started learning Indonesian, I had someone, I guess kind of a tutor kind of thing, who just gave us vocabulary, basically. Just gave us a general basic vocabulary to start learning from, basic words. And that helped enough to learn a few things. But after that, it's really about immersing yourself. And I found that those of us who learn faster than others, there was a thing about you had to get over being shy. So at the beginning, I was a bit slower to learn, because you're afraid someone's going to laugh at you, so you rather just try to use. For me, it was just trying to use my English rather than speaking an Indonesian language. But it comes to a point, I guess, where if you decide you really want to learn a language, it's going to take time, it's going to take effort, and it's going to take being bold. Not being afraid of people laughing at you. So you're going to say things wrong. You're going to mess up, but that's how you learn. And I guess after being there for about a year, I was conversational. It means I could get around, do my things, but I couldn't yet speak in front of people. So whenever I was a speaker, I would still use an interpreter. At that point, I did ask God to help me. I said, if I'm going to be in this country, obviously I need to speak the language. It's very difficult to constantly use an interpreter. You can't connect with people. You have to find someone to travel around with you constantly. It's not effective.
Yes, I just want to stop you right there because there is someone who lives in my apartment complex. He's been in Taiwan for over 10 years and he does not want to learn a lick of Taiwanese, and I feel bad because he always needs to rely on someone else, and when I look at him, I don't want to be like that because that's just putting more strain on the locals, and it just corners you off, and like you're not able to relate to the locals and socialize with anyone else. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. Please continue with your story, because you even told me one time, like you prayed in Indonesian, and that sort of helped you. But maybe I'm mumbling or jumbling my words. But tell me.
If I continue on, so I asked God at that point to help me, and I do feel like at that point my tongue changed. I mean that pronunciation wise, it became easier. So I didn't sound so much like a foreigner. However, at that point, I just decided to begin to pray in Indonesian. So sometimes it was a bit difficult because you'd be mid-sentence and not know the word for something. So I had to go look it up or, and think about it. It took me longer. It was more of an effort to take time to pray. But I think it really helped me a lot, actually. I felt that even if my words got messed up, God knew my heart. So that's why I started doing more and more with prayer, and to the point that I was more comfortable. Before I ever spoke in public in Indonesian by myself without an interpreter, I had actually already practiced in my own room.
All right,
speaking to myself.
Okay.
And it's just maybe not coincidentally, but after that, I was actually given an invitation without using an interpreter to speak. But I'd already actually practiced myself before that.
Excellent. So teachers in a new country, talk to yourself. Well, the next question I want to ask you is, and I put a lot of thought into this question because I asked myself this myself, and it's true for me because as a teacher, you said you're always learning. I myself, I'm trying to learn Cantonese right now, but what makes a student stick out? I'm not saying what makes a good student, what makes a perfect student. It's what sets one student apart from others that you've seen, the ones that you've taught, because you've started a school where maybe there's been dozens 1 year, but only a handful go out and actually use what they practice. They're missionaries to different parts of Indonesia. So what makes a student stick out?
For me, although I like to see what they do, and I do a lot of practical things with them outside of the classroom, for me it even starts right in the classroom. I can tell how someone is looking at me. I mean, it starts with how attentive someone is. How much do they want to learn? So sometimes people come to a classroom and they think if they just sit there, they'll learn. They don't take notes. They're not really truly listening. They're getting out their phone. They're doing other things, and you'll find that by the end, it has not impacted their life the way it could to someone sitting right beside them who maybe was not even as smart, but someone who paid attention, someone who wanted to be there, someone who wanted to learn. And I think especially I see this happen a lot. We also do English classes at our school in Indonesia now. And, a lot of people, when they want to learn English, they think it's very cool. They think it will be very cool to speak English, and so they go to English class with these high expectations that if you sit in an English class, you suddenly can speak the language, not realizing it takes a lot. You have to take notes, you have to pay attention, you have to practice. It takes time, it takes energy, and it's not going to happen right away. Anything that you're going to learn that will help you, in the future years, it's probably going to take a while. Every kind of education usually takes some good time. And so I find the students that I see that are the most successful, that get the most, are not necessarily the smartest, are not necessarily those who you'd think, but the ones who come in with the best attitude and the ones who want to be there, those who want to learn. If they want to learn, they're attentive, they're truly listening, taking notes, and willing to take steps in walking it out. I find those are the best.
Now I'm going to put you on the spot right now. Now, you don't need to mention his or her name, but tell me a story about one particular student that sticks out to you.
In is a good example or is a bad example?
No, good example. It could be this year if you've been teaching 12 years, so pick a year.
I'll give you one from this year because it's
All right.
quite recent. A current student that I have right now,
All right.
a young man who came into school who actually joined the school even a few days late.
All right.
Heard about it. His sister was already in the school, so he'd heard about it and suddenly decided to join. Very sudden decision.
Okay.
I'll say this as what makes him a good student is the very first day he joined the class, we often ask questions to our students, give them a chance to answer before we teach something, get to hear their opinion and ideas. And he immediately put up his hand and was answering. And it was quite something because some of the students who have even been there for 1 year, won't answer. They're afraid of being wrong, and they just sit there in silence. And he immediately started answering. And his answers were totally wrong. Okay, totally wrong, but he didn't stop, and he has continued on with the answering, being willing to be wrong, being willing to be corrected, and listening and learning. Comes attentive to class. I don't see him picking up his phone. I see him very attentive in learning. And the last time I was teaching was just 2 weeks ago. I was in Indonesia as well, teaching another course. I realized that in just 2 months' time, how much he had changed. And this time, I could ask a question, which I thought was a very difficult question, and he could answer it and answer it correctly. And he answered more questions than anyone else in the class.
All right, good example. All right, next one is, this is another one I've thought about a lot, but what has been your biggest challenge in or out of class, whether it be discipline, cheating, lying, having to expel a student? Like, for example, one current thing I'm dealing with is cooperation with parents, where I tell my kids, or I tell some of the parents, if you want your kids to learn, you got to learn also, because it sets an example, gives them more opportunity to practice, and it helps you with your English, and that's to parents. So this might not be the biggest challenge you're facing right now as a listener, wherever you are, but I'm going to ask Susan, what's been your biggest challenge, or one of them?
I'll give you 2 examples from
right.
2 different areas. How about that?
Cool.
So for specifically in the Bible Institute that we have in Indonesia, one of my biggest challenges there is sometimes for myself as a teacher, I'll put it that way, for myself as a teacher is because we're a school that's past secondary school, so we tend to have a very wide variety of students. Of different races, different ages, different stages of life, different education. So in that point, it's a bit difficult for me because sometimes you're trying to teach one thing, and that one thing you're trying to teach, it's very difficult to choose what level you teach it on. Because you could have people in the class who know absolutely nothing. You could have people in the class who are very educated about this. So sometimes it's a bit difficult to be able to be a good teacher to everyone in the class, so that the one who's already more educated at a faster pace doesn't feel bored, doesn't feel like they're just hearing something they've already heard, and to not go too fast so it's not over the heads of those who are a brand new listener for the first time. So learning to be able to make things basic enough yet interesting enough, I think, is a major challenge. And I think for people doing English as well, we find this in our English courses as well, that that can be the same case. You can have someone come in who already has a bit of understanding and someone who knows nothing, and sometimes they're thrown into the same class. So it can be very difficult to be able to reach both extremes and have them both happy in the classroom and still learning.
Yeah, we have basically the same problem in what we call cram schools, private schools, because it's a fine balance between business and teaching. We need students to pay the salaries of the workers and teachers and whatnot, but sometimes when we test students and see what level they're at, it might not be level appropriate for them, but because the school needs to make money, that student is still placed in a level that's too high for him or her. And I've experienced this plenty of times, and it's true, it is hard catering to the smart students, because if you have to slow things down, they get bored. But if you're going teaching at the higher students' pace, the other ones can't follow along. So I totally understand that situation. If you're a new teacher, understand that may happen. And it's nothing personal. It's just, as they say, it's just business. So let Susan tell the second example, second story.
I think the second would be similar to what you had just said a few minutes ago about parents and such, is that when we're going into poorer areas in Indonesia and we try to provide free English lessons as well into some of these areas, or education and tutoring, even it could be free. The problem is that if people don't respect education. They don't feel there's a need for education. So sometimes the poor areas would be fishing villages. So the parents then feel that it's more important for the child to be out helping the father get fish and get money than it is to have an education and learn something like English. And so there's this that attitude will obviously affect things as far as attendance. And people not coming to school or not caring about it. So sometimes it's even they could be getting such an amazing opportunity of free English lessons and not even taking it.
I don't think that would be a problem in Southeast Asia, but it is difficulty convincing the parents that they themselves need English because they didn't start until junior high school, whereas students nowadays start as young as kindergarten. Who did you look up to when you were younger? Like, I'll give you my example. I used to look up to Jackie Chan because he was funny and entertaining. And that goes back to what you said, like making something fun to learn. So who did you look up to when you were younger?
Interestingly enough, when I was quite young, I love to hear stories of missionaries who came back from overseas
I see.
and the different kind of like cultures and things that they would share, even though some of them were quite scary stories. But just a different world, and people who traveled to other nations and did different things. I really enjoyed listening to those when I was younger. Of course, as I grew up, maybe things changed, and I looked at.
Sure.
I also looked up to different people and different things, but I find that I actually, in the end, came back to what I admired as a small child.
Now, what are you up to nowadays?
Well, recently married and getting involved in things on maybe a more international level now. Moved my base over to Malaysia, able to travel to more countries, teaching in a lot of different schools now, actually in countries throughout Asia,
I see.
and also still running things in Indonesia, traveling over there once a month, getting more into media, radio and TV, social media as well.
So yeah, it's not only about English or language learning, but if you're a teacher listening to this, don't only expand your English skills, like there's other skills that you can pick up along the way. And the same for you listeners who are students. There are many things to explore rather than education. You can educate yourself and not only get a piece of paper. There's a lot more out there than written tests. So what's the best advice you would give your 20-year-old self if you can turn back the clock?
I guess I would say to just do things. Sometimes we think that I used to think that things I wanted to do, oh, that's something I do. For example, opening a school. I had the dream of opening a school. I thought, yeah, that's something people do in their 40s or 50s. And so it's something that you think, yeah, I'll do that later one day. I had no idea I would open a school when I was 25.
Yeah,
Which
and
I
that's
did.
pretty young.
So and even other things, having an orphanage and such. I thought, oh, that's something you do when you're 40 or 50, but we'll actually be having an orphanage in our place this year.
Wow.
By the end of this year, in the next couple of months. So these things that sometimes we think that we just put off. I'll do this and this first. But what I've actually experienced in my own life and watching others, it's just that sometimes when people put things off, they never end up doing them.
True.
And the longer you put something off, sometimes the harder it is, and people end up getting in a place tied down in things in their life. I had a lot of friends who wanted to go overseas, but that they just end up working a job and maybe buying a house where they are. And once you buy a house or a car and you have payments, it's very hard to get out of these things. And so I'm very thankful I moved overseas actually when I was 20 and took this advice maybe when I was 20 partially, at least to move overseas, because at that point I was free enough to make those kind of decisions. And so I would just say, things will never be perfect. It will never be the perfect situation, to do things, but just at least start taking steps towards something. I always tell my students this, that big things don't happen out of nothing. Big things happen from taking a lot of small steps.
That's good advice. Now, what advice would you give students who are listening to this right now?
Especially if students of learning English or other languages, is that it's just that it takes time. And I have had friends who have a gift of languages and pick it up super quickly. But for the most time, I think it takes time and it takes practice. And it's not something that you learn overnight. It's not something that just happens just like that. It's not easy. To be honest, it's not easy. But I will say this, that I've seen people who, as long as they wanted to learn, will learn.
All right.
It's that coming back to that whole, I guess, the desire to learn and the willingness to spend time, to spend effort, to willing to be laughed at sometimes when you make a mistake,
True, yeah.
and to just keep going on.
Okay, well, I had a good time catching up with you and hearing some of some of your stories and some things that maybe I haven't known before. Now, how can people reach you?
Okay, well, my name is Susan Hoover, and that Susan Hoover name it's got a website, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook page.
All right, and if you didn't catch that, I'll leave links in the notes below. But once again, thank you, Susan, and thanks for taking time to do this interview. And any last words?
I think I've probably said it all in this interview. I think so. Thanks for having me.
All right, thanks for listening, everyone. I just want to leave you with this story. I remember one time when I was with Susan in Indonesia where she held youth outreach. There were crowds of people, hundreds of people. Actually, it happened on several occasions. But when she was speaking, when she was teaching and just sharing what was on her heart to the many people in the crowd, it was really captivating. That's why I wanted her to be, at least one of the first guests on the show, because she was really, and she is really an inspiration to me. And what was more compelling was the way the crowd was intently hanging on every word she was speaking, because she was speaking with such passion and people were just listening, just really waiting for the next words that were coming out of her mouth, because it was just so captivating. So again, thank you, Susan, for being on the show, and I want to thank you for listening. You have yourself a good day and take care.